Et donc sur les nouveaux modèles de...
We are going to talk about the new development models without any further delay. You see that one speaker is not here. Bob Hopkins will come. He is a little bit late. In order to introduce this session, what I suggest to do is to start from somebody that has been launched a few months ago, because it was at the beginning of September, a call to resilience. And the main principle of it was to start from the territories, the experiment in the territories, in order to build the leverages, the movements that will structure the economy of tomorrow. So this call for resilience is the main topic of this session, and it is related to the experiments we are going to hear this afternoon. This idea that within the territory we can experiment, we can set up, we can create the models for tomorrow. It's quite old in this region, because the region, Hauts-de-France, is a pioneer for these new economic models in line with the sustainable development, and it is also a pioneer. We celebrate the 5th year with new interventions, in order to support the initiatives, this local creativity. And it is also unique because we have a cooperation between different actors different. We are going to see that in the initiatives that will be presented later on. We will see that there is no limit between the initiatives of enterprises, of institutions, and of citizens. Everyone will meet one another in order to create this new project, this new creation of territories. In that framework, the IEEFC has launched for some time now a workshop on the pilot cities of transition. And therefore, the new experiences wanted to be met, wanted to see the new elements, the commonalities between all these initiatives. And with the conference today, we are going to go a little bit further. We are going to look at the worldwide scale and to see what the commonalities are, the convergences for initiatives that are being taken at the global level. The movement of the cities in transition. Okay, we see Rob Hopkins. He is entering the room. So we have a multinational network. On the other hand, we are going to have local movements on a specific city, on a specific territory, up to the regional experience represented by INSEA. But it is something else. It does not have a local dimension, because without talking about it, we see that behind initiatives on specific objects with functional purposes, immediate purposes, as a matter of fact, we have the strength of a new model, new shapes of cooperation, and also representation that we have in our mind concerning the separation that the status of the stakeholders, the objects on which we work. So we change the object thanks to the experiences that will be presented this afternoon. I'm not going to continue, and I'm going to introduce the various speakers in order to gain some time, and so that at the end of this session you will have the time to raise some questions. So around the table we have Marie-Hélène Foubet coming from the group SIA. She's a director of that group. Rob Hopkins concerning the transition network, and Luciano Marco Silva from the INSEA, and he's going to talk about the experience of Belo Horizonte.
Alors,
And without further doing, I'm going to ask Marie-Hélène to present the SIA group, what you're doing, and then you could talk about these first experiences that you have had for some time. So the group is present on France. We have a specific model, that is to say that we represent 250,000 houses in France. We have companies on the territory, and this is corresponding to the saving banks on the territory. So the shareholder asks us to be company. We do not manage the housing in the south or in the north. So this is not the same way of intervening. 2 years ago, the group met all the people in order to define a project, and the project is to grow together. If you say that, how to grow together with multiple partners, and this is a passionate job. We make a city, we talk to the citizen, we talk to the association. So we have a different occupation. So we wanted to grow all together, and we wanted to put the dwellers, the inhabitants, in the center of everything. And for CIE, we have 45,000 housing, and we have 45,000 housing on the territory, but the history is the mining dwellings. So at the beginning, we had 7,000 houses in the mining region. So on the mine region, we represent 30,000 housing. And when we decided about the strategy of the group, we have had a social fund. And we said, okay, how can we put the citizen at the heart of the region, and especially in the mining region? And I believe that you come from the region, so it's a territory that is quite fragile, vulnerable. We talk a lot about it. We have an heritage coming from different houses. It's not like Marseille, but it's you have a different population. You have miners, of course, but we have fewer and fewer. Or we have a population that has lived this dismantling, this closing down of the mines. And we said, okay, we can intervene on the territory. We have a lot of houses on the territory. And we said, okay, how can we create some innovation, and how the citizen can be at the heart? We do not talk about citizen, we talk about inhabitants, because the houses are being shifted. People do not use their house like before. So we have a lot of rules, because we have a mission of general interest. We have a very heavy regulation, and people say, okay, I'm going to buy a house, in this project to grow together. We say, okay, what are we going to do tomorrow? And after discussing at length with the colleagues, with a big group, a larger group, say, okay, to build houses and flats, we can do that. We can build 100,000. That is very easy, but we cannot manage the people inside. And this is the heart of the matter. How do we put the inhabitants within the houses? For example, we have 2 municipalities where we have 44% of the housing. So we are submitted to regulation. And we say, how are we going to put the citizen at the heart of the map? And now we had the commitment for the renewal of the mining territory. And we have a plan on the mines that makes it possible to change the housing system. And we have a lot of heritage, and so we cannot touch the facade and the front of the houses. And we just say, how are we going to do this energy renewal? So the commitment is two things. First of all, we have to look at the energy sector, the climate, of course, because these individual houses are taking all the energy. So it was necessary quite rapidly to change that. And the second reason, how to give a purchase power to the citizen. The first renovation that dated 5 years, people pay 120 euros after we put individual meters, and now they pay 50 euros. So you see the difference between 120 and 50. We have not increased the rent. And these are the figures, and therefore we said, okay, we have collaborators in different functions. So we say, okay, we could see things in a different way. We have association with the inhabitants. So we want the involvement of the inhabitants, and we wanted to take up the cooperation. They know how to do. So we have a population that is quite young or quite old, because we have people that are quite old in the mining region. We explode the national figures. So how can we maintain these people at home to find again a job in this mining region, because we have a problem of health, we have a problem of unemployment. And therefore, we say that the strategy of the company as a whole would be the inhabitant at the center, that is to say, act inhabitant at the heart of everything. And we use also the motto cohesion, which comes from cohesion. And we had a call for project because two things have been decided to have somebody who is responsible for it, because we can have a strategy, you put it in the drawer, and 3 years later you say we haven't done anything. So we have a person who is in charge of this strategy. We have 600 collaborators. We have 3 officers, and we have some mediation too. And we said, okay, we are going to be closer to the inhabitants. We are going to work on the social innovation, first action, to work on the job. How can we accompany the people? So it's a door to the inhabitants. So this, we wanted to have a global approach, an integration, and we wanted to look at the global situation. We wanted to look at the situation of the city, the mining city. And this is a real village, and it's outside of a big center. It was there that you had a mine. How can we listen to the inhabitants? How are they going to cooperate with us so that we could have a productive city? So it's a proactive action. And I would like to rebound to what was said this morning. My objective, and I dream about it, I said, okay, when on a territory we will sit around a table and we will forget the bad enterprise, doing nothing for the territory, making only money, and meetings that are useless, the local associations that ask some money, but they do not talk about this money they spent. So we said on a territory, the partners must talk to one another, and they talk especially to the inhabitants of the city. And they live in it, they talk about it. So we gave an answer to a call for project. We won that project, and this was a city close to Valenciennes. And the workshops start, and we started saying to the inhabitants, we have a partnership with the University of Valenciennes. And And you are going to talk about your houses, the way you use your houses, because you have young children. What about your garden? I do not know what, if you know these mining cities, they had a garden, they had an activity, a gardening activity. Today it's more difficult. So how can this city live? So we are going to intervene during 3 or 4 years. The companies will be present, and they will become an actor of their territory, and this territory will become productive. So this call for project is to create a permaculture, that is to say, to work with the inhabitants. We wanted to grow vegetables, to sell the products, to exchange the products, and the purpose is to have a social link in this district, to work with the people that could discover their neighbor, talk to their neighbor, because I knew these cities, but in these mining cities, there was a solidarity, there was an exchange, there was a city in the city, and it disappeared throughout the year because of the unemployment. You have 40% of unemployment in some cities, and Young said that 4 generations have known unemployment because of a problem of mobility, because of a problem of training. So it's hopeless. And the purpose is to say, okay, we are going to enter with the door. I mean, it's important to talk about the entry door because the inhabitants, you do not have any shops, you do not have any public services, but the people talk to us, and how can we bring partners? How can we renovate and make these cities productive? So it's going to start. The work will start mid-19, but it's not important. But because what is important in this project is to take time with the inhabitants, to listen to them, to hear them, to give them an answer. And we are quite surprised because we started 6 months ago, and it's a national project, and the region has given us a label. We bring a lot of partners, and after 6 months, when we came back from Paris, after the jury, inhabitants said, okay, Paris talked about us. And this is a first result. People are not forgotten anymore. Maybe the people in Paris will listen to them. And today, on the territory, it has started. We have a permaculture, and okay, you will be able to buy potatoes, but not today. But the social link is being recreated, and we are going to renovate, and we are going to create a district committee, because people will. We will take the people out of their house. We will break everything, and we will rebuild everything. And during that time, we are going to work with the people. There are 2 houses that we will not touch. And after 6 months, we see that we have a lot of competences and skills and ideas in this district. It's enough to just listen to them and to accompany them. And this is a virtuous circle, because we hope that in 2 years' time, there will be a production in that city.
So what you've just presented here, I mean, it's quite far from what you were saying about the traditional job. I mean, it's within the people from SIA that you proceed to these translations. So how does it translate for the SIA people in terms of transformation? Well, it's not a one battle, actually. And I mean, we've got to tell you that it's not an experience for experience's sake. I mean, we've got to find a model that we had in our renovation projects, but we've got to contribute to, when we've got to move on to participation, it's difficult. Some collaborators tell me, well, people are eager. No, they're not demanding. I mean, to be demanding anything is derogatory. I mean, they will demand when you don't answer them. They want explanation. How much is the budget? What is the work going to be like? I mean, what is the schedule and the cultural transformation of the company internally? Because I was surprised to have some executives, 3 of them are in the room here. They created a small group on cultural information of the company, and they gave me a meeting, and they said, I mean, things are not moving as fast as we want. We would like to take part in that. I mean, stop people from being anxious. SIA is a good company, and I've got people who've got 30 years experience, and from overnight, I mean, it's not somebody building 4 walls in concrete who's highlighted, is the one who's close by. I mean, we've got housekeepers. I mean, it's the mediator, the people who are close by, who are very important. So our engineers build up nice buildings, but it's not, the building is not what is of interest. People living in the building is what is important. And to know that we've got from a housing massification system, I mean, after the war, I mean, everybody had to have a house. Now, the challenge we face is to go from the street to the housing estates. Somebody who doesn't have a house has difficulties going into an autonomous house. Heavily handicapped people, I mean, thank God, I mean, there are fewer of those, but I mean, the housing has got to be adapted to that. I mean, how do I provide support to these specific populations with the state telling us they've got to be mixed? And you know that a social mixity is something that you can decree all of a sudden, take an old one, a young one without a job, but it's not all that simple. And this cultural transformation, I mean, we support. We've got 2 full-time supporters who meet the request, who coach people, because it's important not to forget internally to provide support to our collaborators for them to be able to get accustomed to this new profession, listening to people who rent the houses. I mean, with an email address, I mean, people write to me straight away, and my collaborator is totally disturbed by the fact that the CEO has been directly emailed by a person who lives there. So it'll take time. So we're still in the mining area, mining district, and let's move on to you, Luciano, and the experience of the Ragged Bone Men in Minas Gerais. I'm going to let you go through your presentation, and we'll see if we have any elements of discussion or not. I'm here to share with you our experience in Brazil. I come from the Minas Gerais state. My name is Luciano. I work for the INSEA. It's an NGO working as a technical support team for the Ragged Bone Men for recycling materials. Since 2001, we've been following this different organization support schemes with the Ragged Bone Men and with the people living on the street to try and find and recover dignity, knitting new social networks. We are present in the Minas Gerais state, in the state of São Paulo. We've got a small network there in Espírito Santo and in Santa Amazonas state also, always trying to work on recycling and creating a network. We've got 120 cities using this process, trying to find a new culture around solid waste, because in Brazil it's a problem which is a very important. We've got 136 cooperative associations and 9 networks, which are like a group of cooperatives in some regions, organizing themselves to set up common strategies for planning and overcoming the different problems they have. 2,400 people, basically, we have. involved in this work that we do support. The INSEA created a network, the Joint Inclusive Recycling Observatorio, to create knowledge about this knowledge of inclusive recycling. In this observatory, we have researchers, university lecturers and different NGOs of São Paulo, the Catholic University of São Paulo too, together with other organizations from the civil society, together with the Racketeer Men. So the purpose is for those people with the knowledge they have, besides the academic and technical knowledge combined together, they can get new knowledge. In Brazil, I mean, waste is a social problem, an environmental one, but also a financial one, an economic one, because a lot of our cities still have waste compounds in the open air, and people work there in very degrading conditions, and the cities, municipalities don't have enough resources to change this reality, sending this waste to a better destination. So Brazilians don't have a knowledge of identifying waste as being a problem, so they just drop their waste in these open air dumping areas. And we've got people who use these leftovers of the consumption society, and it is this poor population we do work with. So these last 20 years, we tried to put some kind of order in this situation, trying to create and to offer solutions to it, getting to our transition strategy. These cooperatives currently work based on a new model so that the waste will dry up and become part of the production chain. In Brazil, we've got a very important production, but very few people commit to this recycling project. So the Brazil, with its continental size, with 994 municipalities, in the Nordest region, some cities still have those open-air dumping places. Some have so-called under-control dumping areas. But I mean, in 2001, there's a new tendency, a new trend, which is the organization of these trash pickers. And they managed to break this barrier of something that was not visible or not considered. So organizing themselves as cooperative associations, they can create a new model dealing with this waste and waste for recycling. So they created, I mean, these trash pickers have been going on for centuries now, but to overcome the major problems, we need to recognize them as being true professional people, true workers. They've got to be acknowledged in the work they do. So that's part of the organization process that will contribute to new strategies. And the result of all this movement and this social pressure they do exert is that since 2002, we've got major breakthroughs in terms of the legislation. And this transition and this acknowledgement was done thanks to the law that has changed since 2002. As you can see, managed to get several rights all the way up until 2010, when the first federal law saw the light, bringing some rules to this new way of managing waste. And the main right is the right to work and being rewarded for their product, because they will extract most of the waste, contributing it to go back into the production cycle. So they've acquired a lot of rights, but a lot of these trash pickers still live in abnormal conditions. And that's why one of our battle is for the cities to pay for the work that they actually do. And there are a lot of a lot of cities paying for the work done by trash pickers and generating jobs. They will improve the living conditions of these people, and they reduce the processing costs of the waste for the cities. And for this transition, we are trying to show that waste is a global problem, but the solution relies with every and each person. You can't say, I'm going to throw it outside, because it's not possible. It is important for us to have solutions, because a large part of this waste will end up being thrown into our oceans, creating to other environmental issues. We have battled a lot in Brazil to produce some kind of a hierarchy. Managers only deal with the final destination, but it's the whole chain, the whole circuit that has to be taken into consideration. We've got to work on the population even before we can use how the waste can be used again and how to recycle it, this whole chain. And first, it's a reality in the Minas state. It's a state with an area which is similar to the French territory, 853 municipalities, 21 million inhabitants, and only 192 municipalities having specific programs for selective waste collection. In green, that's where people are burying the waste. The rest is not managed properly. So this discussion that we have started will end up in an economic model. I mean, the current economic model is the cause for most of our problems. I mean, that's why this transition deals with finding out which economic model will actually be the alternative to what I've just been mentioning so far. That's why we entered into discussions to have this circular economy with valorization of waste, to reintroduce waste into the production chain. We can do that with packaging material, but not organic material, organic waste. We have no clean energy production or generation systems. We've got no program for electrical appliances waste disposal. There are still lots of things, lots of possibilities that we are not involved with, but which are good to be kept in perspective. So all this work, we've been talking about it since 2012 with the public authorities, but also associations, companies, thinking about a technologic journey to promote value the waste. I mean, in Lille, we came to see your experience here. We're starting to talk about this technologic model to know which one we want to implement, actually, to comply with what the population wants, to add value to the waste as economic and social raw materials, so to speak. We want to promote people who actually work with this waste. Here's the work we've done with the public authorities, we can see that incineration, waste incineration, as it is done in Europe, or according to the European model, for us is a very severe problem because we've got moist waste, and for this incineration plant to work, the result depends on what the trash pickers will find us. So in the Middle state, they forbid incineration of city waste. It's a law dated back 2014, and since then we've had a lot of discussions about new alternatives. There's a pressure exerted on the part of the from the part of the economic sector for it to be discussed further, because it's only the managerial state forbidding this kind of this type of incineration. So this has to mean a lot of discussions with the public authorities. We are discussing with specialists about new economic models. We also invite to these meetings authorities. As you can see here, Christian Bouchard, who's from Lille, with the MPs also attending, and all those debates are organized to support this new model. We have politicians coming to value this new economic model. We are preparing our trash pickers for them to be able to be trained and to understand this period of time, this transition period that we're going through. We train the leaders, local leaders, and we make training sessions in the universities and in companies to get this collaborative model. We can mobilize a lot of people around this idea, whilst looking for the support of specialists for the dissemination and propagation of this model. Right now, we've got lessons, university lectures given with the participation of Artemis, the French laboratory, and we invite experts coming from different countries, coming from San Francisco, for instance, where a lot is done about recycling, the Zero Europe program. So I'm keeping an eye on the time to make sure that I stick to time. There's a whole movement in Latin America. We meet people in Latin America because they have the same similar situation. 4 million trash pickers. And these meetings are organized in Latin America, in Africa. Every time we invite other professionals in keeping with this activity, and we have also local experiences organized. We've got a Parisian resource network, and with this network in Paris, we work on adding value to bigger waste. We haven't started that in Brazil yet, but I mean, we are about to start. We're thinking about other activity models which would take the whole recycling sector into consideration, because it's talking about goods and services, and it impacts other categories. So we've got to create the link between each economic stakeholder of this particular sector. We've got a local experience also with this with this new model in one district of Belo Alzo in Santa Teresa. We are trying to implement these ideas. This particular district has 1,600 inhabitants, and 80% of our cities have under 20,000 inhabitants. So this district has got a greater population. This experience should help us a lot to to draw up these journeys for waste valorization, always having at the heart of all this the cooperatives and different services. And with the support of the state government, we created a farm with a local ecosystem where all these experiments will be interconnected from the production of food all the way up to its waste, so that we can then generate this link as a field of experiment with the involvement of all the stakeholders. Here you can see again where this farm is actually located, this pilot farm. You've got the river crossing it through. You've got the river going through the city, and with all this, we try and reproduce new trading models, new activities in this region. In Brazil, people want to see before they can believe. So it's difficult for them to believe if they don't see anything in concrete terms. And that's why we have this, to try and convince the population. We've done a lot of training to promote recycling, to enhance the chain of values with new cooperative models, thinking about local development first. That's the thematic of this forum, to focus on how important is job creation. And every time a job is created in an incineration plant, every time an incineration plant is created, it results in 20 new jobs. So that generates a lot of potential for growth for these trash pickers. That's something that we can implement throughout all the different regions. We've got a vision for our future. For the trash picker job becomes something which is done in better conditions for them to earn their living from it, and they are the educators of the new society. If they sort the waste, they know that they're going to help a family to improve their quality of life. We're trying to create a link between all those different stakeholders. Of course, we've got a lot of challenges facing us. For instance, in the ménagérage state, we don't have a specific sector to put all this in place. But whatever we pick, we don't have a transformation plant. We've got to send the waste to other states for it to be processed, and obviously it increases the cost. That's why it is urgent to create alternatives to incineration, because that is a serious problem for us. As I said, we got to improve and use any opportunity we have, bearing in mind that this is a challenge which is really paramount in Brazil. We don't have a lot of resources for research and resources to put all this in place. For us, the major challenge is the fact that in the future we've got to think about speeding up this transition and these changes, and that's something which will truly change the way we think, the way we work. We've got to be able to adjust to new realities and adapt to new realities, and more we've got to broaden this cooperation network. There's not a finite model. We've got to collaborate to build up this model together, and all these exchanges we're having here in this forum helps us a great deal to build this network. Thank you very much.
Alors,
Well, I'm not going to ask you a question immediately because we see that there is a lot to be said about how, still concerning this transition, your experience shows that there is an approach that is specific to the technical aspect of the waste. To work, it must be recognized by the people. It must be recognized by the public service. And these people must be recognized. I think that the presentation is a link between the social, economic, environmental aspect, and we see the three pillars of the sustainable development. There is a transition to the approach that Rob Hopkins you have, and I'm going to ask you to do the same, but you have to think about the cooperation with the room. I mean, try to stick to 10 minutes for the first presentation, and then we could enter into the discussion afterwards.
Hello again. So, I don't need that, do I? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in detail about two of the projects that I mentioned this morning. I had these in because I didn't know if anybody... Hands up, anybody who wasn't in the opening session this morning. Okay, good. I'll show these again then. So this is just a little bit of why we do transition, or what's the thinking behind it, and this is just to capture the scale of the challenge that climate change presents us with, and the urgency. And every year that we have put it off, oh, we'll do it next year, then the steepness of the scale of what we need to do grows all the time. And this is just a 2-degree curve, not the 1.5-degree curve we need. So the thing that was always really occurred to me is that one's the pointer, isn't it? So at the moment we're up here, and we kind of think that's really great, and that's as good as things can get. We stand on the top of 1 million barrels of oil every day that sustains that being how we live. But actually, what we really need is to get down to about to here. But in order to do that successfully, I think we have to become really, really good at telling the stories about how that will be and how fantastic it could be. How the food could be wonderful, and the conversation, and the parties, and the beers that at the moment are just unimaginable. How the clean air will be, how lovely it will be to swim in the rivers that are clean. The parties that will happen in our street. The children playing outside who at the moment never go outside anymore. For me, that's really, really important. Is how do we tell the stories about how this can be? Because otherwise, we're never going to do it. And you see it in. This is something I love. I saw this, I couldn't believe it. This is 4 years ago on the back cover of The Economist magazine, which I don't read very often because it's not good for my blood pressure. But this was the advert on the back. So this advert would have you believe that ever since the beginning of evolution, we've always been men, which is very strange to start with. And secondly, the idea that this car and these trousers represent the ultimate in human evolution. There's nothing comes after it. That's it. We've arrived, everybody. We have arrived. So, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And it looked familiar, this guy, at all? It's very frightening. So I want to tell you two stories about transition. And so transition is a movement that we started 12 years ago in my town called Totnes in Devon. It has since spread, and you can find transition groups now in 50 countries around the world, including in Brazil. And it's a self-organized approach, which is about starting where you are. So we say we try to build an economy which is low carbon in everything that it does. It's an economy that builds resilience. So we're trying to build into our place that ability to withstand and adapt to shock. It models this idea of appropriate localization. So where we can bring things back to the place, where we can produce things to meet local needs, that's what we try to do. Where possible, we try to create the opportunities for people to invest, not in the banks, who often fund all the disastrous things we read about in the news every morning, but actually, how can we create the opportunity for people to invest here in this place to make change happen? We often hear this term impact investing. Well, for me, that's impact investing is seeing the place you live change. And it's about an economy that brings people together. You know, sociologists in the UK say we have an epidemic of loneliness. An epidemic of loneliness? How did that happen? So how can we have an economy that does the opposite to that? So this is my town, where I came from yesterday on the train and where I will go back to this afternoon on the train. This is Totnes, is a town of about 8,500 people. And and this is really our idea of how we try to think about economic development, that it's like a bucket. The economy of Lille is like a bucket in the nicest possible way, and into that comes money from different places, and at the moment it all just pours out of the holes, the supermarket, Amazon, So every time there's a hole, the opportunity to fill that hole is the opportunity for entrepreneurship, creativity, imagination. Oh, hang on, these are the wrong ones. These are my slides from earlier on. Okay, well, I'm just going to fly through. Oh, here you go. Right. So I want to tell... Hang on, which way around? Yeah, I'm going to do it this way around. So I'm going to tell you this story first before we go to Totnes. I'm going to tell you this story, which is about Liège in Belgium. So I went to... About 6 years ago, they started a transition group, Liège en Transition. And I went there. They did a big event called Ceinture Alimentaire. They had this question, a what-if question. And the what-if question was, what if, in a generation's time, the majority of food eaten in Liège came from the land immediately around Liège? Beautiful question. Very simple. And what's powerful about it as a question is it creates lots of space for people to step into it and go, I have a piece of that puzzle. I have something, I can bring something to that. So when I went there 4 years ago, they created a big event. They invited everybody in the city who cared about food, chefs, baristas, academics, farmers, and they all came to a big event to discuss what that might look like. Their idea is it's like a basket. Every year they add in new cooperatives into this model. And so they've already created a mushroom business. So I went away. I came back after 4 years, 6 months ago. In that time, they'd created 14 new cooperatives. They raised 5 million euros from local people to fund those cooperatives. And as I say, every year they're adding new things to it. This is one of the shops they've created called Les Petits Producteurs, which I said in my awful French. Anyway, Les Petits Producteurs. This is just a shop in the centre. They painted it white. They put the food out in boxes like this. They tell the story about where the food came from. They have this idea that you don't need to have too much choice. So they find one person who makes really good bread. That's the bread they sell. One brasserie that makes really good beer. They have one kind of beer. When they started this shop, they didn't know how well it would do. It's doing so well, they've already opened another one, and they have plans to open more and more and more of these shops throughout the town. The beautiful thing about what's happening in Liège is the way that it has become the story of the city. So I met the mayor of Liège, and he said, 8 years ago we wanted to be a smart city, now we want to be a transition city. They have land all around the city that they own as a municipality. They're making that land available to young people who want to come into agriculture, who want to grow food in the context of feeding it into Ceinture Alimentaire. So when I asked Christian Jaunet, who coordinates it, why did this work? Why did people invest money in this? He said, because we had a good story. We had a powerful narrative, and it was a narrative that had a really clear invitation in it. Come on, you've got a role to play in this. Step in. And that's for me, there's a real art to designing those good what-if questions, which they really perfected there. So now I'm going to take you to my town, as which I showed you earlier on, of Totnes. About 8,500 people. And right next to the train station, in the heart of our town, there is this factory. It was a milk factory. They used to bring in milk from 1,300 farms around the town, employed 170 people. And in 2007, the factory closed. Everybody lost their jobs, and it was left looking like this. And the day it closed, a whole group of us got together and said, the community needs to decide what happens here. The community needs to design what happens here. The community needs to build what happens there. And then the community needs to own that place going forward. We campaigned for 7 years to get the landowner to take us seriously as developers. At the beginning, they thought we were mad. It built up to a stage where in 2014, we signed an agreement with the company to say that we would get the permission. This was the day when, for the first time in 7 years, the gates of the factory opened and the whole community came into the site, and we read a statement about what was going to happen. It was a really quite extraordinary event. The red hearts everybody is holding are the logo of the campaign. We called it the heart of the new economy. And once we had done that, we then started a consultation. In a town of 8,500 people, we consulted 5,500 people to design what would happen there. We created a consultation process that went through the past, the present, and the future of that site. It wasn't just a normal developer where you say, what should happen here in the future? We said, no, the past of this place really, really matters. People came in, they brought photos of their parents working there. They brought in memories. This guy here came in, he had worked there for 40 years. And he said, I got made redundant. I lost my job in 2007. I was then off work with depression for 7 years. Today is the first time I've been back. And he cried. And it became like a self-organized museum to that factory. It was really extraordinary. And the consultation then went for about a year and a half. And this is what the community designed. 65 homes that meet the local need, a hotel, a place for older people, all kinds of spaces for new businesses to be incubated, 100% renewable energy. And once we had done the design, we used a new power that the government gave, which said that rather than getting planning permission through the conventional route, you can have a referendum, a local referendum. You might have heard British people aren't very good at referendums. But actually, this was a really good local referendum, and 85% of people came out and voted yes, we want this project to go ahead. So work will start on this project later in the year. So for me, the thing with those two projects is that there is something in there which is about creating a space that invites people to step in. You know, we had, with the Atmos project, we've had lots of people in the community who are advocates. Now we're going to create a membership. Everybody in the town can become a member. We'll be inviting everybody to invest in it. So part of it is, as one of the coordinators, realizing actually what I think should happen here doesn't matter. That was genuinely 5,500 people's ideas that designed that. So anyway, my time is up. That's a taste of a couple of projects through transition. I hope that they were of interest, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So one quick question maybe, because you talked about what it needs to put these things in place. I mean, you talked about narration, you talked about the story. I mean, it calls on resources, not just fruits and vegetables. Of course, we need fruits and vegetables to sell them, but I mean, it also calls for resources which are difficult to get together. So what about the nature of these resources? I mean, is that, what does this nice story tell to people who have got to come on board?
Was asking, does the resources you need to make those projects come out are not just material things? There are also things like trust, like you speak about sharing knowledge or things like that. How that it takes place in those both projects?
I think one of the things that both of those projects have in common was some really, really stubborn people. Yeah, there's something about having, one of the reasons that the second project I told you about actually became a reality was when we finally were able to sit in the same room as the company who owned that site, and they could see that stubborn look in our eyes, and they knew that we'd still be there in 10 years. You know, that this was going to happen because this was what the community wanted. And it was so interesting that for many years it was known as by the name of the company who owned it. It was the site with their name on it. What was interesting was after a few years, because of the work we did telling a new story about the place, everybody in town started to call it the Atmos site. It was so interesting. Like at least 2 or 3 years before it was even going to become a reality, the name changed of what people started to call it. I think you know, both of those projects are also based on a foundation of a lot of community building work beforehand. I think there were particular people who were able to sort of catalyze them, I suppose. But it was the thing that really struck me in Liège was I said, how on earth did you raise that much money? The first project that happened was called Vin de Liège, which is a cooperative vineyard. They raised 2.5 million euros to create a vineyard. And I said, how on earth did you do that? How did you have the confidence to think, hey, I know, maybe we could raise 2.5 million euros for a vineyard? And the guy looked at me very patiently and he said, it's Belgium. Some people have some money. People like wine. Don't be afraid. So I thought it was really great advice. So I passed that advice on to you. Don't be afraid. There's something about when there's a really strong story, particularly now, I think, people really want to bring that stuff into reality. And our experience with the Atmos project was, you would think if you asked 5,500 people, what do you think should happen in this factory? You would get 5,500 completely different answers, many random mad ideas, and there would be no way that you could focus down. But actually, when the process works well, actually it becomes very, very clear what people want. And the facilitators who did that consultation were absolutely extraordinary.
Du coup, j'imagine que la nature...
So I imagine that the nature of cooperation, you weren't here at the time of the introduction, but the nature of cooperation, we were talking about the citizen movement, but I mean, it creates structures, but it also takes on board structures which are not citizen movements. So how does it happen in the two different experiences you had?
The thing in Liège was that they started completely from the bottom. So it was a citizens group, but they always invited the municipality in all the time. They didn't say, you can't come in, you have no role. There was always that invitation for them to be part of the process. So it was a thing that really... The thing that I always look for in transition, the kind of holy grail for me of transition, is those examples of really active, clear bottom-up, when it meets top-down, that meets it in a way that's really helpful. When your municipality says, how can we help? What do you need? What are the obstacles in the way that you can identify and that we can remove to help you do what you need to do? That's when it gets really exciting. And that's kind of what I saw in Liège. And the thing with the Atmos project in Totnes was that's been almost entirely a citizen-led project. There have been places where the municipality has helped, but actually, one of the things that we learned from that was you can get started with no resource at all, and you can get quite a long way with no resource at all, but there does come a point where you need some help. You need some money. You have to pay the engineer to survey the site. You have to pay the ecologist to find out where the bats are flying. That sort of stuff. You need then organizations to step in, and there were some organizations who stepped in at key points, and people in the community who stepped in because they had also got to the stage of saying, this has to happen. If anything else happened to that site, I would be heartbroken. That's the dream. That's what I want. How can I help? And that's lovely when you see that too.
Ok, merci. Peut-être que du coup on peut passer à vos questions. J'imagine que...
Let's move to question and answer time from the audience to ask any of our speakers. If you could just introduce yourself briefly, and then so that we know, responsible for social networks of Malform, but I will ask a personal question. This is a question to Rob Hopkins first, then to you, Marie-Hélène, and then to the last speaker. How do you make sure that your transition efforts do not only involve privileged populations and do not contribute to gentrification of some district? I mean, there's the climate march, and we're a little bit against you. What is the rest of the transition like? So how can we make sure that the transition is not just for bobos, privileged people, and how doesn't it contribute to gentrification of district? And Marie-Hélène can then answer, how do we manage a transition in underprivileged district? And then I think that the climate change will only speed up the gap there is between well-to-do populations in the city centers, but also at the level of the world, because there's a big issue about plastic pollution in oceans nowadays. And it's true that this plastic pollution comes from Bangladesh, or I went to Brazil, so I visited the Catadoás, the places you talked about, Rio Tietê in Sao Paulo, which is one of the most polluted rivers in the world. So there's also going to be a gap between the efforts made by northern countries deciding about banning any plastic packages, and countries such as Bangladesh and Brazil, on the other hand, who are lagging behind as to the ban on the use of plastics. And there are lots of other examples. So to maximize our time, I mean, we'll have a second question, because I don't think that we'll have time to go back and forth second time between the speakers and the audience. Right at the back of the room, maybe? Okay, we've seen you. Yes, Enrique, I'm here as a mere citizen. I've got a very concrete question for Rob Hopkins, probably more. Last Saturday, in 20 cities around Lille, were citizens who gave the GIEC report to their mayor, and some of them had a meeting with their mayor to talk about climate and transition. So are you available next November? And more seriously, for citizens who've got an hour to talk to an elected representative, which number one priority is employment in the arbitration he or she makes. Only in 1 hour, what source, which elements would you use to convince an elected representative to help the transition committees in his city?
Last question, and then we will get the answers in the order that you wish to have. I do not know who is going to give an answer first. Consulting in public funding, Rob Hopkins. It's a project of Marie-Danielle. Roughly speaking, I would like to know how you would do, what would you do if you had to set up a project on a territory where the population is hopeless and where the population is not a real engine in order to develop a transitional project, economic project? Thank you. So who would like to give an answer? Marie-Hélène? Concerning the gentrification, excellent question, and I do hope that we do not have any problem. The rich people do not want to come to the place, but this is a problem when you talk about social mixing, because we are going to do our job, but then people do not have the same needs, so we need mobility, we need a lot of things. We had that problem because in order to develop oneself in Lille, we could enter on a territory, Lille FIV. It's a future development plot of land. Sometimes it's better to demolish and to build again, because I agree with Rob Hopkins. We have to look at the past of the people. We built the future on the past of the people. We took the historian of and that person help us to write the history of these people in order to give you an answer. We were in the outskirts of Lille. And we said, okay, we had we have people that cannot read or write, and then really, this is something which is at stake, and the question that you have raised, and I come back to what I said, the social mixing is not something that happened by chance, and in the new district you don't have to destroy the people. No, people have to grow. Of course, you have to mix and to blend them with other people. This is important. And on the other hand, we talk about the political district of the city, and you do not think about the problems in the wealthy district. And so the social cohesion is not is more simple in the wealthy district than in the poorer district. It's a job. And you have to pay attention to that because the purpose is not to renovate some district. You have to have a productive district. If you do that too fast, then it's going to be violent. I agree with you. We can blend rich and poor, but if they have nothing to say to one another, it's useless.
Great questions. In terms of gentrification, I think that the way that you avoid or the way that you manage the risk of gentrification, certainly what we try and do with the Atmos project in Totnes, is a number of things. Firstly, it's based that the design of the project is based on the needs of the place. They're not based on the needs of external developers, of external capital. They're based on a survey of the housing needs of the people in the town, many of whom really struggle in terms of housing. So the housing will be always rented, never bought and sold at rents that are affordable. The building of the buildings will be done using a training program, creating work. We'll be creating a local labor exchange, so finding ways to employ local companies rather than some big contractor who comes in to do it. The aim of the project is to create jobs. It's not a gift economy project where everybody does it because they've got some spare time. The aim of that project is to create jobs for people on an ongoing basis. The consultation that we didn't just sit in one place and expect everybody to come to us. We went out to the people, the communities all across, the very different communities all across the town, and with the membership drive and the investment request to people in the community, we will set that really, really low. So it's free to become a member. Anybody can become a member of the Industrial and Providence Society who are doing the project. And then if you invest £1, that's an investment. You have as much say in the project as anybody else. So for me, the project has tried very, very hard from the outset to avoid gentrification. And the project in Liège, those shops that I mentioned, the food in those shops is as cheaper than the supermarkets in many cases. So when I was really impressed going around their shops in the centre of Liège selling local food from local farms, organic beer, there were people in there from Turkish, Moroccan, all the different communities were going in and using that shop because the food was great and it was really affordable. And so it's really important to have a mindfulness of that, I think. And I think there's a really interesting thing with gentrification around when you see creativity used as a driver for gentrification. Many cities now, you have this, you build a very expensive big art gallery and then you surround it with big hotel chains. That model of creativity-led development is really terrible, I think. But actually with the transition way of looking at it, I think you can see a different model where you drive economic regeneration with creativity in a way that actually doesn't create that normal kind of gentrification. In terms of Lille in November, I have no idea. You mean this November or next November? This November might be a bit of a struggle, but I can give you you can write to me and we can see. If I had an elected representative in a room for an hour, was that your question? I would tell them about what's happening in the city of Preston in the north of England, where the council had a very conventional economic regeneration model to say, we're going to build a big shopping mall and we're going to invite all the normal big chains to come and open in our shopping mall. And then what happened was the whole thing collapsed because 2 of the big chains pulled out. So they had to think again. So they brought together the 7 different organizations who spend the most public money. So the university, the fire brigades, the municipality, into a process to say, where does all the money we spend go? Every year we spend £750 million together. Where does it go? And they found that only 4% of that money was actually spent into the economy of Preston. So that money is meant to be making Preston a better place, and like water, it's just running out through their hands, like the bucket I showed at the beginning here. So it has completely changed how they think about their economic future. They're going to bring their pension fund back from wherever, back to Preston, and use it to build affordable housing. They're changing the process for tendering for big contracts to say, rather than this is one big contract, they break it down into smaller contracts so local people can bid for it. They're going to create cooperatives for the hospitals and the university to provide the laundry, to provide the food, to provide the energy, so that money can stay locally. So I would tell the representative, him or her, that story of Preston, because it's and ask them the question, how much of the money you spend in this place stays here? And they won't know. And it's a really, really fundamental question. And the last question was, how do you do transition in a place that feels hopeless? And that's such an important question. One of the things for this book I'm writing about imagination that was really interesting, recently I spoke to a woman in Mexico City who, because I'm writing this book about imagination, and in Mexico City, the mayor of Mexico City's office has a Ministry of Imagination in their department, whose role is to sort of make sure that the imagination is there and is fundamental to them thinking about the future. And one of the things they did was they did a big survey of everybody to say, what are your hopes? What are your fears? What are your dreams? And actually the idea that the future felt hopeless came back from everybody. It didn't just come back from the poorer communities, it came back across the board. People saying, I feel completely hopeless and the future is going to be awful. And that sort of, that evaporation of imagination and possibility was across the communities. But I think, you know, there is a point that transition tends to need a few things to get started. It needs people who have a bit of time to commit to it. It needs people who feel that if you try and change things, sometimes they change. And for many people, that's not their experience. And I was in Paris a couple of years ago, and we went to, you might have to help me, there's one of the banlieues, which is near Paris, where they had big riots about 5 or 6 years ago, and I can't remember the name of it. One of those, anyway. I can't remember. Anyway, one of those, and I got invited to go there, where they had this really fantastic project going on. There was about 84%, I think, of people were from different parts of Africa in this place, and their dream was and they'd seen Demain, and they were really excited about transition. These ideas. Their idea was, we want to make this place into a tourist destination. We want this place that everybody associates with being really scary, and really, we want to make this a tourist destination. We want people to come here, and we're going to use that to drive doing all the cool things that we're going to do. And they were it was brilliant. They were going to do a local currency. They were doing stuff around food, and I thought that was really extraordinary. I think we have to recognise that government imposed austerity, this idea that you cut and you cut and you cut money from the people who are most vulnerable and the people who most need it, is a direct assault on a culture's imagination, that it creates the ideal conditions for the imagination to shrink and contract. It creates anxiety and stress, which shrinks the imagination. And this is the time, if there's ever a time in history we need to be at our most imaginative, it is this. Because climate change, if it's anything, is the most fundamental failure of imagination in the history of the world. And at a time when we should all be at our most imaginative, that's not happening. So for me, one of the things that needs to accompany things like they're doing there in the banlieue and a whole lot of different programs is we need to be helping people. I went to Dundee in Scotland, which has the highest suicide, the highest anxiety rates in Scotland, and visited a project there called Art Angel, which uses art as a way of bringing people back into the world. And I spoke to people who said, you know, a year ago I was about to commit suicide. So I might not be here this year. And actually, this project has kind of brought me back into the world. And I spoke to the people who organised it, and I said, and they said the two key things about this project are safety and hope. And actually, if you can give people a place that feels safe, they said people come here, they feel safe. People come here, they feel hopeful. And when they have those two things, then the future sort of starts to come back as a possibility. The idea that we can affect some stuff starts to come back. So I would say that actually, from the top-down perspective, all policy making at this stage needs to be about how do we create safety and how do we create hope for people.
No caso da realidade do
As far as the Brazilian reality is concerned, I think that for us the challenge is to put people at the heart of things, because our economic models will think about the private sector, but not the private individual. So all those short-term contracts, privatizations, do not take into consideration the local population and their potential. That's why we fight for the mobilization of citizens. If citizens are aware and they're looking for this transformation to take place, I mean, it is the way to find the solution to commit to this transition, not just for a certain person, but for all of them. In our case, we work with underprivileged population with a low income, and obviously this change will encourage or will be in favor of those people who are in areas without any prospect. And when you get there and you talk to the population, listing the potential which is possible, then that's when we create new desires. I mean, our purpose is to convince the authorities. The social control is something that is still limited, and we are trying to have policies which will guarantee these spaces for clarity and commitment. Thanks to all three of you, and maybe as not a conclusion, because we don't want it to come to a conclusion, this dialogue we're having, but I mean, what I take out of the debates and the question and answer is the importance of making something visible, making people visible, and making competence visible, because we might not imagine that, because it has sometimes not to do with efficacy, and yet efficiency is in the people who are taken on board of these projects. When we talk about the Catanoes or people from most of people from these mining areas, I mean, they live in these countries, and there's this almost physical need to be taken on board in their territory, and capacity. The skills is not something to do with something scientific or competence that would be readily available that we could federate as and when, but there are also skills and competence in those people if we take the possibility to open up the possibility of using this competence they have. So the question of resources, which gives the opportunity for this competence to get unveiled. I mean, the question is, what are the spaces where we find that we feel safe, where we can imagine, where we can project ourselves, and ACR contributes to this kind of space, putting the citizen at the heart of the approach. We generate an environment which will promote this kind of competence to see the light. I mean, that doesn't make that these people have been used to being left on the side, and with this gentrification, I mean, it's difficult for those people to keep up their hopes, but it's important to say that, yes, it is a little bit difficult to do, but that's where it has to happen. That's where we're at the heart of seeing the current model at its weakest. I mean, there's not the compensation of people who win. People there are losing on all counts. So we need for those people to take action and in a big way. I mean, we need to. Without these people, it won't be possible to imagine a virtuous transition, not only from an environmental standpoint, but that will also bring back the balance of people and revealing the competence of people. Local people is something which is really key for all your demonstration. And I think that the opportunity we had given to us by the World Forum people for you to take the floor, and thank God, I mean, it happens quite regularly. It's a better way to stress the fact, to stress what is actually happening, which might not seem much, I mean, when taken individually, but 1 + 1 + 1, I mean, faced with the size of the challenge, there's also a big size of this movement which is taking place, I mean, which is getting stronger and stronger year by year, and calling for acknowledgement by the local representatives. I mean, there's a way to convince this local representative in just 1 year, but this forum is also very important to show the logo of what we're doing. I mean, think locally with local people. That's something which is very important to imagine another future, and we can see how that's in breach with what we think about future normally, with projections, technological projections which are totally out of the territory and its soul. I think that the exercise we've done, and that's a frustration because, I mean, we would still have about 100 questions to ask you, but we push for time, so we've got to stop this session, unfortunately. But, I mean, this opens to an encouragement for you to go and see the other events on this forum, and obviously to network with one another, to ask questions to each other, to boost your own commitment in your different actions. Thank you for your discipline in the audience to keep your question within a good time frame, and see you soon in the forum.